I am sitting in a room. It is small and empty aside from my existence. The room is a burnt golden color, like an illustrious mustard. I sit at the center and stare blankly at the wall ahead of me. I feel a chill creeping down my spine, as if there were a window open, but no window exists. There is only myself and the room. Suddenly, I feel a shift. The room squirms as if all barriers were made of worms, and now I feel as if I am being held. We are the same. I hear a voice speak to me. I continue to stare blankly ahead as the wall shifts and ripples like a full bucket on a rainy day. Out of the rippling wall, I see a face begin to form among the clattering waves. The eyes of the face stare directly into mine, as its demeanor struck fear into my body that still sits on the floor of the room. The walls, floor, and ceiling all turn into rivers of white and rush past me. The face, along with the room that created it, disappears and transforms into a figure. The figure, now floating in an upright position, is in the void created by the absence of the room. It is human in structure, but with no distinct features. The figure moves towards me and reaches out its hand to lift me from the ground. For some reason, I take the figure's hand and it lifts me to my feet. The figure moves closer to me. It approaches until our chests are only an inch apart. It dips its head slightly closer and I begin to hear a scream. The screaming is like nails on a chalkboard, like metal grinding against metal. It seems so loud, I fear I will become deaf. The figure has no mouth, but I'm sure the screaming is coming from it. I close my eyes, turn my head, and cringe at the sound. The figure grabs my shoulders, still screaming, and slowly moves its hands upwards past my neck to my face, directing me to look at it. As I open my eyes, the figure grabs its head and tears itself in half. I can't believe what I'm watching. From head to groin, directly in half, the figure tears itself apart. As the last fibers of its being rip, the screaming stops. I stand staring at the two halves in disbelief, and then they begin to change. Each half of the figure begins to grow and reform until there are two figures standing before me, both of equal stature. Together, they lean from their hips and simultaneously speak. We created you for an unknown purpose. I can do nothing but continue to stare at them. They each move to either side of myself, and then they begin to speak at me, one at a time.
Yes.
No.
Right.
Wrong. Fear. Love.
The chattering is polarizing. I move to cover my ears, and the figures grab my hands and together shout.
You will listen to us!
The figures throw my hands down and walk away from me. Once they've created space between us, they begin to fight. First, the fighting begins with incoherent screaming, then it transforms. The figures begin to smash their heads against each other repeatedly. The two figures begin to grapple each other, and as they grab and claw one another, they begin to melt. It is as if their bodies were liquefying. And as the fight persists, they melt into each other. Finally, the two liquefy in front of me and become a rippling pool of liquid. The pool begins to rise like a geyser, shooting straight up around 20 feet vertically. The liquid does not come back down. Instead, the liquid pools and morphs into a new shape. The liquid slows and becomes more solid as it hardens. I recognize the new figure as a tree. I step backwards to glance at the tree, and as I do, 3 apples fall from it. The apples are not red nor green. Instead, The apples are made of the same white matter as the figures. One of the apples shifts into a humanoid figure like the first three and begins to run towards me, screaming. I raise my arms above my head to guard myself, but as soon as the figure became close to me, it returned into its apple shape. Two smaller figures now approach me. I realize these are the other two apples. They both transformed into smaller humanoid figures. They approach me, and I kneel to greet them. "We are not the same," said the two figures at once, "but we are similar." As they finish speaking, they pick up the apple in front of me, and at the same time, they take a bite of either side. Then they drop the apple and begin to walk towards the tree, and begin to play under the branches. The apple in front of me begins to morph once again and walks towards the other figures under the tree. He sits beside the figures, and as they play what appears to be a game of patty cake, the two smaller figures look at the large one and reach their hands towards the tree. As they touch the tree, all the matter assimilates aside from the larger figure. The tree and the two small figures become one and collapse downwards. The matter reliquefies and falls like a waterfall, quickly becoming a large pool of liquid matter. The remaining figure kneels over the pool and appears to reflect momentarily. The figure then strikes the liquid as it vanishes before him. The figure begins to rise to its feet, and as it does, the screaming begins again. The figure begins violently swaying and jerking and grabbing at itself. It begins to pull itself apart and rearrange its composition, exchanging one bit for another as it wails unholy tones across the void. The figure charges toward me and leans in toward my face. The figure picks and pulls at its face, and it screams so close to me, I collapse to the ground. I sit with my eyes shut and my ears covered. I feel the figure kneel over me. It grabs my hands that are trying desperately to block the sound of screaming. It throws them to my sides as it pries open a mouth on its face. Once the mouth appears, the figure begins to speak. As the figure speaks, it disappears before it can finish, disappearing into a shimmering cloud of dust that now swirls around me. The dust constructs itself around me until I am sitting in a room